Raymond Shaw told me this story himself, and as it happened to him, he should know more about it than anyone. Before he married, he was a great walker, and most of his holidays were spent wandering just as his fancy dictated. He knew all those pleasant byways between Dartford and Canterbury. He had visited every abbey in Yorkshire, and climbed most of the Welsh mountains. One year, it must have been soon after the end of the war, he decided to take a late autumn vacation in Derbyshire. It was a county he had never explored, but he knew that it was the walker's paradise. Derbyshire did not disappoint him. The weather was glorious, and he lingered in Dovedale, camped in Millersdale, tramped through the manifold valley, and explored the great caves near Castleton. One evening he found himself down in the pine woods on the banks of the River Goyt, and, as there was a hint of rain in the air, he decided to push on to Buxton. According to the map, there was a choice of 3 ways: over the Goyt Bridge and up the bridle path to the main Manchester to Buxton road, up to the Cat and Fiddle and down from there, or a short cut over the moors. He was debating which way to choose when a couple of workmen came along. Raymond accosted them and asked if the moorland path was easy to find. "Aye," answered one of the men. "It's easy enough, but it's getting dark and I should leave the moors alone. Stick to one of the main roads." "But I have an electric torch," said Raymond, "and if the path is a good one it should save me a few miles." "Keep away from the moors, lad," chimed in the other man. "There's things up there after nightfall." "What sort of things?" asked Raymond, whose besetting sin was always curiosity. The men shrugged their shoulders and looked rather sheepish. Obviously they wanted to warn him against something, but could not bring themselves to be more explicit. "The moors are always queer after dark," volunteered the first speaker, "and it's best to take the high road." "I don't agree," laughed Raymond. "I like quiet places at night, but thanks for your advice." He jumped a fence and crossed the river by the stepping stones. The men watched him in silence as he climbed through the heather and bracken. Then one shouted something after him, but he failed to catch the words. Within a few minutes he struck the track and was soon high above the valley. It was a lonely, deserted spot. In places the bracken grew waist-high by the side of the path, and huge boulders dotted the landscape. Here and there was the crumbling shaft of some long-deserted mine, and the only sound was the plaintive call of the curlews. Raymond can never say when the other man joined him, or where he came from, but suddenly there he was walking at his side, quite a pleasant-looking chap dressed in rough corduroys. "Good evening," said Raymond. "I think it's blowing up for some rain." "Aye," was the answer. "There will be plenty of it before the moon is up." Raymond was glad of company, but he found his companion disinclined to talk. They covered a mile or so in silence, and then a ruin of some kind loomed up through the dusk. "What is that?" Raymond explained. "Death House," was the reply. "That's what it's called hereabouts." "That's a gloomy name. Why do they call it that?" "Would you really like to know?" "I should," replied Raymond, curious as ever. "Then let us sit down here for a few minutes," said the man, indicating a large stone. The two seated themselves side by side, and the stranger began his tale. "It was in 1882 when Job McNelson, who owned a bit of moor about half a mile away from here, discovered a vein of gold ore in a pit he was working on his property. Job went mad, and having a bit of money saved up, decided to go in for gold mining on a grand scale. But he didn't want government inspectors butting in, so he had to move warily. He needed a strong, trustworthy man to assist him, and it was then he remembered Harry Green, who had been his pal at school. Well, Harry was soon discovered in London, and he was out of a job. Being something of an adventurer, Job's scheme appealed to him, and he threw in his lot with his old friend. The two journeyed back to Derbyshire together, and it was arranged that Harry should live with Job at his house. That's it, behind us, but it was called Moorland View in those days, and was as pretty a home as you could find in this part of the country. But it was terribly lonely, and the loneliness had already got on Mary McNelson's nerves. She was Job's wife, a dainty wisp of a girl he had married in Manchester. She hated the moors and was glad of a visitor to cheer her up a little. To cut a long story short, the mine proved to be a failure. A tiny vein of ore does not make a gold mine, and that's all there was in Job McNelson's pit. But Job was firmly convinced that a large vein would eventually be discovered, and went on blasting and digging long after Harry had abandoned hope. He was down in the earth at all hours of the day and night, and the girl from Manchester and the man from London were thrown more and more together. Of course they fell in love with each other, and she forgot that she was Job's wife, whilst Harry forgot that he was Job's friend. That's the way things happen. I can't say when Job discovered how things were between his wife and Harry, but he kept very quiet about it and planned a terrible revenge in secret. One day he came in and declared that he had discovered a rich lode, and invited Harry to go down the pit and see for himself. The Londoner needed no second bidding. He descended the shaft and made his way to the spot Job had indicated. There was no gold there. There was a charge of explosive, fitted with a time fuse. It went off whilst Harry was probing round, and in a matter of seconds he was dead under a load of rock and earth, with half his face blown to pieces. In Moorland View the man and the woman heard the explosion, and after he had finished laughing, Job told his wife what had happened. He was quite demented, and made such a poor job of killing her with a carving knife that she was able to get away from him with her throat half cut through. He caught her by this very stone and completed the job. Then he went back to his home and hanged himself behind the door. That's why they call the place Death House. "What a ghastly story," said Raymond. "One blown to pieces, the other hagged to death, and the third hanged." "Harry wasn't exactly blown to pieces," replied the man slowly. "Only one side of his face was blown off. Like this." He turned the other side of his face to where the light of the rising moon fell upon it. "Like this," he repeated. A workman crossing the moors about 7 o'clock in the morning found Raymond lying on the path about a mile away from Death House. He must have fainted when he saw what the moonlight revealed, and afterwards, in a semi-conscious state, have crawled away from the haunted spot.